See, the thing about things that have two faces is that you really never know which face you're going to get. Hello everybody, this is Chain, your Commander-in-Chief, welcoming you back to Chain of Commander. For this month's trip to the base of operations, I figured we would check out these new flippy dippy land thingies that Zendikar Rising has given us because they really add an element to deck building that we have not seen before. Now before we get into it, I do ask if you end up enjoying this sort of content, definitely consider subscribing below. I'd love to have you folks join us going forward, and you know, if you like the video, like the video. It means a lot to show your appreciation. I'll show my appreciation to you, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, and it'll cause a never-ending appreciation loop that will result in a draw unless somebody has a way to break it. It's great. Also, if any of these cards speak to you on a personal deck building level to the point where you want to acquire them, definitely consider using our TCG Player affiliate link below. It won't cost you a single cent more, but it will help out the channel. That said, let's get into this. Now, these lands, they come in two flavors. They have the lands on both sides flavor, and then the lands and spells flavor. Those are a bit spicy. Let's focus on these lands and lands flavors first, just to get them out of the way. They're calling these lands the pathways. There are 6 of the 10 possible color combinations so far, but we are told that the next 4 are due on the horizon at some point in the near future. But right now we have 3 allied pairings and 3 enemy pairings. For our allied pairings, we have the blue-black, the red-green, and the green-white. And then for the enemy pairings, we have the white-black, the blue-red, and the the red-white. Essentially what you do is when you look at these cards in your hand, you just choose which side you want to play them as and just plop them on the field as an untapped version of that color-producing land. So for 2-color decks, these are an easy slot in. They provide basic fixing without the normal requirement of entering tapped, and that's great. For 3 or more color decks, that's where it gets a little bit more situational, but pretty much my general rule of thumb would be this. If in a 3-color deck you have one color that is much more prevalent than the other 2, make sure that the versions that you put in the deck of these cards represent that color. For example, I have this graph here. This is the mana base of a Abzan deck I'm currently working on. As you can see, green is very prevalent. But white, not as prevalent. And black, even less prevalent than that. So when I'm putting these pathways in this deck, I will want to make sure I get the 2 that have access to green. So the green-white one and the green-black one. I do not want the black-white one. Essentially, I want to make sure that I have access to the primary color of my deck when I need it, and if I need access to one of the splash colors, I have access to one of the splash colors as well. I don't want to be stuck choosing between one of 2 splash colors, so make sure I just have a green and the other color available. Now, if you're approaching more than 3-color decks, that's where we're probably going to want to take a step back from these lands. While early game fixing is nice, in 4 and 5-color decks, you want to make sure that all of your lands produce more than one option type of mana throughout the game because you're going to have significantly heavier mana requirements throughout the game. So I would not recommend these in 4 to plus color decks unless out of nowhere one of those colors is absurdly higher in play than the rest of the colors in the deck. That said, those are the lands out of the way. Let's talk about the fun new stuff, these spell land combo things. So these things came in 3 different rarities from the set. You had them started uncommon, they went to rare, then they had mythic versions. For the uncommons and the rares, these were all effects we've seen before. They were wheel style effects, removal, protection, stuff like that we've seen before, but they cost a little bit extra on the front in exchange for being able to play them as a land if you ever needed them as a land instead, but those lands always enter tapped. So they provide late game use when you can use them as the spells as they're intended, and they provide early game use where you can play them as a land if you really need a land. The mythics, a little bit different. These are more unique effects on the front. Big splashy spells, super crazy swingy effects that are the type of thing you want to see in EDH. For example, Agadeem's Awakening, that's the black one. It's essentially a Seasons Pass Reanimator that you can bring back X amount of creatures with different CMCs. And Turn Timber Symbiosis, this is the green one, lets you look at the top 7 cards of your deck and put a creature among them onto the battlefield. And even if it's a tiny creature, it makes it bigger for you. So these are big, crazy effects that can really adjust and make the board state much more in your favor. But they also, on the backside, can be played as a land that are tapped unless you pay 3 life. And in EDH, 3 life is virtually negligible. It's nothing. You start with 40, and a lot of decks, they end up gaining more life throughout the game anyway. So paying 3 life to turn a big splashy spell that you might not be casting for 6 to 7 turns into a land you can use right now is not really that bad of a rate. So never a dead card in your hand. They can be just as useful in the late game as the early game, as anywhere in between. And like I said, these spells, they tend to cost more, but in Commander, these big mana costs, they don't mean as much, unless you're like on the CEDH side of things, where everything used to be 1 or 2 mana, but that's a different world. We'll let them figure that out on their own. But pretty much, there's a lot of synergies that derive from these type of cards as well. If you haven't seen my video regarding the crazy Zendikar mechanics, go check that video out, because there are some crazy Zendikar mechanics that you're going to want to just look at, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you have seen that video already, then you already know that cards that grant you abilities to play lands from zones that aren't your hand, such as Oracle Moldiah from the top of your deck, or Crucible of Worlds from your graveyard, interact very well with these particular spell land things. In this case, I want to primarily look at those things that let you cast from the graveyard. Well, not cast, things that let you play lands from the graveyard. Your Crucible of Worlds, your Ramianap Excavators, that new one, that Ancient Green Warden. All let you play lands from your graveyard. Suddenly, these spells in hand, you could play as spells, and when they resolve, they go to the graveyard. And then you could play them as lands, all in one fell swoop. So you're getting 2 cards for the price of a single card. And that is excellent value. So any decks that are already playing these land graveyard synergies are really going to look at these particular lands as like free real estate. It's great. Conversely, you can now use other tutor effects that normally don't have access to lands and suddenly get lands with them. Things like Mystical Tutor or Spellseeker can now fetch one of these, and then you could play it as a land. So suddenly, if you're stuck on a blue source and no other lands, and you need to get a second land, you can use your Mystical Tutor to grab one of these. This is obviously a niche, next-level big brain play. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see somebody do this within the next couple months at your local F&M to get themselves going, because nobody wants to miss land drops. Speaking about not missing land drops, that brings up the next big question for these things. When you're building your deck, do you want to count them as lands, or do you want to count them as spells? Well, if we were to count them as lands, that means you have more drawable spells in your decks. You are less likely to get mana flooded out. But if you were to count them as spells, that means you have pretty much just as many spells as before, but you now have access to lands as well, so you're less likely to get mana screwed. Now, personally, I would recommend counting these things as spells, specifically because, there's actually a couple of reasons. First, they exist as spells in every zone other than the battlefield. So outside of playing them, any interactions with them will be done as if they were spells. Second, they are primarily spells first. Even though they're cost a little bit more, their backup plans of land are not great lands. Tapped single card lands are not great. So you really only want to use them as lands in emergencies. And third, even just missing 2 land drops in EDH will set you back so far. So if anything, I want to hedge against mana screw more than I want to hedge against mana flood. Now, there are a couple. I thought of 2 exceptions for that. If you can think of more than these 2, definitely let me know below. The first of which is if your deck has an absurdly low CMC, where mana screw is significantly less impactful on you than mana flood would be. then you probably want to instead cut lands for these type of spells so that you can get as many of the spells as you need. The second one I thought of, and by thought of, I think I saw somebody post this on Twitter, these make excellent Sunforger targets for effects that you normally might not put in a Sunforger deck. Now, 5 of these can be played in a Sunforger deck. You got Valakut Awakening, Spikefield Hazard, Kazul's Fury, Sajiri's Shelter, and Kabir Takedown. All these are effects that you might not want to dedicate a whole slot into the deck just to be a Sunforger target, but now suddenly they're also lands. So you can play them as a land if you draw them, and then go retrieve them with Sunforger when they're still in the deck. So, more utility there. That's kind of what we want to see, and that's what we have this segment about, is introducing more utility through your mana base. Also, one important thing regarding however you want to play these cards. Do not fall into the trap of holding on to these cards in hand in the hopes of casting them later if it ultimately means missing a land drop. Play these as a land if you need to. Don't hold on to them just because you want to play them as the spell later. It's not worth it. The land's more worth it every single time. Trust me on that one. So, that said, overall, I think these lands, spell lands, double face modal cards, whatever you want to call them, are super cool. And they're going to add an extra layer of consistency to your EDH decks to help prevent non-games from your mana base playing against you. And that's what this segment's all about. Getting your mana base to work for you. And these are the exact type of cards that will help your mana base work for you. In Commander, we don't get best of 3. We get one shot to play the game, and if you flood out or if you get mana screwed, you feel really bad. The amount of times that will occur in the long run with these sort of cards in your deck will definitely be diminished, and you'll have more enjoyable playable games going forward. I love these cards. I think they're great for our format, and I'm loving to see what they kind of do with them going forward. But till then, thank you all for joining me today. It would also behoove me to remind you that this here Subjective Reality Commander deck, sealed, new in box, this is the subject. Get it? Subjective Reality. Never mind. This is the prize in our Month of Spoop giveaway. I'll include a video in the description below with the details for that giveaway, but I can definitely tell you the first step to submitting your entry to it is hitting that subscribe button. If we get to 300 subscribers by the time this giveaway is done, I will add more prizes to the giveaway. So share this with your friends, family, and even your enemies, because the more people, the more prizes. Everybody likes prizes. That said, thank you all so much for joining me today. I love having you here with me to discuss the Commander format. Like I said earlier, I want to hear what you folks think about these lands below. I want to know what decks you're thinking about putting them in, what cards of them you think are the highlights of this particular cycle. Comment down below with your opinion. I want to hear from you. These are new, and we got to get that conversation going and try to get to the bottom of what's good around here. Till then, thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you all again in the future. Adios.